Welcome back, my friends, to AA Recovery Interviews. I'm your host, Howard L., and I'm an alcoholic. Sober since January 1st, 1988, one day at a time. I'm grateful you've joined us. AA Recovery Interviews is the podcast where Alcoholics Anonymous members from around the world share their extraordinary stories of experience, strength, and hope. There are over 150 interviews in this podcast series, all of which you can enjoy on aarecoveryinterviews.com and all podcast apps. My guest on today's show, David B., grew up in a family with one basic rule about alcohol: don't let it interfere with your household chores. Lacking any other parental edicts, David started drinking at age 8 and was a regular alcohol user by age 11. Alcohol's magical effect of intoxication helped David cope with both the dysfunction of his family as well as the intense feelings of loneliness that were fed by the insecurities of moving every 3 years. By the time he was in college, the Jekyll and Hyde effects of drinking were in plain view to everyone except himself. David wondered whether the label of alcoholic that had been pinned upon him when he was just 12 years old might actually apply. But like most alcoholics, that brief introspection was brushed off as his alcohol abuse grew worse by the year. Career dissatisfaction, job losses, and a failed 12-month marriage did little to convince him of his escalating problem with booze. However, David's breakthrough came 5 years into his second marriage when he insisted on couples therapy to fix his wife's discontent with that marriage. The therapist faced him down with the cold, hard realities of David's disease and firmly recommended that David attend Alcoholics Anonymous. At first, he didn't want to go to the meetings. He fed his loneliness with the thoughts that no one in the rooms liked or even cared about him. But the people in those early meetings, including your host, gathered him into the security of a strong AA fellowship. It wasn't long before he got a sponsor and worked the steps that David's life began to improve. To that, he added daily prayer, study of AA literature, sponsorship of other men, and service commitments to his group. And while there were still some bumps and distractions along the way, David's constant desire to live his program from within out guided him through 30 years of contented sobriety. David continues to pay forward his debt of gratitude to the program via ongoing adherence to the basic tenets of AA. Having the privilege to know David since his first days in Alcoholics Anonymous has been a blessing to me. That he continues to live the program with commitment and dedication is an inspiring demonstration of the program's promises materializing on a daily basis. I believe David's story will enthrall and move you. It's a marvelous validation of the gifts available to all who actively seek sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous. So sit back and enjoy the next hour and 10 minutes with my very good friend and AA brother, David B.
My name is David. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, David. So far, you're hitting 100% or 1,000%, whatever. Thanks so much for doing the interview with me today. It's something that's been a long time coming, and I've been looking forward to it for the last 3.5 years that I've been doing these podcasts. You're one of my oldest and closest friends in the program, and it's so good to be able to sit down with you today and talk about a lot of things that you and I have talked about before, but never in the context of you telling your story.
Yeah, I was just talking at a meeting earlier this week about the value of our relationship and the relationships in AA and how they're the most honest and trustworthy relationships I have in my life. So a lot to be grateful for with that.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. How are you feeling? You mentioned to me that you were in Florida and you got heat exhaustion. What happened?
Actually, I went out to catch up with some of my old high school drinking buddies and that I've actually known since we've been 8. And we get together every couple of years, and we were playing golf for a couple days. Mm-hmm. And, I've had heat exhaustion before, so I'm more susceptible to it. And it wasn't that hot, and I just didn't take in fluids over 2 days in the sun, and I got hit really bad and had symptoms like a heart attack also. So I was really sick in the hospital for about a day and a half, and finally feeling better. My blood pressure is still running high, even though I take medicine. So the doc here said if that doesn't drop in another week or something back to acceptable range, they're just going to up my meds. But overall, I finally feel a lot better.
I'm grateful to hear that. That's pretty scary stuff. Now, you were in Florida when that happened?
Yeah, Daytona Beach.
Okay, so you went to the hospital in Daytona Beach or down there somewhere?
Yep.
Did you know what it was when it first happened?
I did, and got inside, and one of my friends made me leave the course and took me inside because I was getting so sick, and we got in the car to have him take me back to the hotel, and it was about a 25-minute car ride.
Mm-hmm.
And, normally you start feeling better pretty quickly when you're in the cold air, and he had the AC on, and I just kept getting worse and worse over that 25-minute drive, and so he just said, "You're going to the ER." And I was getting chest pain and back pain, and
Oh, no.
and then I passed out in the ER. So I was, doctor said that they did the right thing bringing me in. So
You mentioned that these are guys you've known since you were 8 years old. You also mentioned that they were drinking buddies. What's that like going and getting together with people who you used to drink with and guys that you've known for so long where drinking was part of the relationship?
right. Well, these guys, they still drink. Some of them still smoke dope. Not all of them to the same extent on a daily basis, but they're still pretty heavy hitters, which is amazing. They're still alive. We moved around a lot growing up, as you know, and I'd moved from Texas back to Connecticut the summer before my senior year of high school, and reconnected with them there. And there wasn't really anybody in Texas that was drinking the way I wanted to drink and like to drink. And I got in with these guys, and they were a level above what I was doing. We would meet at the package store at 7 a.m. before school started, each buy one of those little mini 8-packs of, I think it was just Miller beer. I'm trying to remember what it was. Drink that, check in for homeroom, go to the classes, go home after school, and then meet back up and drink again after school in the evening every day. So, yeah, we never were any place longer than about 3 years for me growing up any place. That was about the longest amount of time we spent any place.
Are these the guys who you first were drinking with, that you started drinking with and continued to drink with while you were in high school?
No, my sister's 2 years younger than I. My dad gave us our first drinks. I was 5 and she was 3. He gave us our first shot of sake and puffs of cigar when we were that age. And our, it was kind of a manly thing to do.
Yeah, a manly thing when you're 5 years old. That's great.
Yeah, right.
Wow.
And we had a big party house growing up. My dad's super type A personality, college athlete, work hard, play hard. And his only rule was when you're drinking is that you've got to show up for your chores and in the morning and take care of your responsibilities. So we had a lot of drinking in the house. I was allowed to drink, from a young age growing up. And interestingly, though, it didn't affect my sister at all. Alcoholism has no power over her. Certain of us are more prone to the disease, without question, even in the same environment.
She had the alcohol, you had the ism.
I have the ism, yeah. And she just never drank that much.
What did your mother think about all that was going on with your dad giving you the alcohol or allowing you to take it while you were at home?
And that's kind of a bit of a sore point even today with my mom, because there's a lot of denial around it. In moving up to the Connecticut in high school, we had a large house, a large piece of property. So we had weekend parties with these guys at my place in the basement. We had a keg of beer every weekend in the basement. And I remember the first time I was talking about my kids when they were growing up. My mom was there with her husband. I was talking about why I cautioned them about alcoholism and said, mentioned that we had the keg in here. And my mom just freaked out and said, nope, never had it. And it was an every weekend thing. So there's a lot of denial associated with the disease and the behavior that takes place in the family disease of alcoholism. And it still exists today,
Yeah, I can imagine. It's not something that goes away real easily without a lot of work. And I know you've been sober a long time. What's your sobriety date, David?
November 15th, 1993.
So you're coming up on 31 years of sobriety this coming fall.
Yeah, pretty exciting.
Yeah, it is pretty exciting. And considering I've known you all that time, but I'm always interested in hearing about how people start drinking to begin with. I think a lot of people they have a sip or a small amount when they're a kid. It's a curiosity thing. But I don't know too many people, I haven't interviewed too many people who were essentially allowed to drink at home when they were young. That was just pretty much the way it was around your house from the time you were a little kid?
Yeah, we had regular parties at the house, and so I would take sips of the alcohol. We were allowed to have wine with dinner. If I was doing chores with my dad on the weekend, I was we shared the camaraderie of a beer after. Of course, early, probably because of that, I experimented early with the drinking, stealing from their cabinet, and being more willing to try other things, without them knowing. Then they always were surprised when the scotch bottle was less than what they thought, because they're like, I didn't think we drank that much, and I'd be sneaking it from the side. But it didn't really become something that I significantly chased for that feeling that we get, probably until I was maybe around 11 or 12, where I was drinking to try and, get as blitzed as I could and have that effect take place. And alcohol was magical for me. It was. I mean, I love the effect that alcohol produced.
Did you feel that way from the very first drinks that you took, or did it take a while?
It wasn't until, again, probably I was 11, 12 when I started drinking, for the effect. I drink and I felt good younger than that. When we'd have parties, I'd have a sip, and
Mm-hmm.
I felt free and socialized with all the adults, and everything seemed to have a heightened impact on you, right? Music, laughter, it all just seemed to be the experience of feeling good when you did that.
Yeah, so did that relationship with alcohol make up for the lack of relationship with your parents or in the family? What did that look like?
Yeah, I would say again, that is something that took place, after you get to a certain age. I guess it's probably the middle school years, where you start, noticing differences between you and your peers. And I was I was a Walter Mitty type, very shy, oversensitive, liked to be in my thoughts, and I was scared of people. I was just naturally scared of people. So I was more comfortable with adults. But around peers and other school kids and stuff like that, I started having this feeling of not belonging, of an emptiness inside, loneliness, not being equal to. And so around that age of the middle school, 12, whatever it is, the alcohol definitely started being a solution for those things, and who can I find that wants to party?
So you sought out kids that would drink like you did and who wanted to party like you did, or were you still isolated even though you were drinking?
I played 1 year of high school football, my junior year, and I had those friends and would party with them. But I'm trying to remember the first time I was in Texas, 8th grade, the first time, and I would drink on the weekends around some people, and I remember somebody referring to me as an alcoholic, although I didn't really know what it meant or anything. One of the kids or something.
Well, that's unusual for someone that young to be called an alcoholic.
There was a lot of escapism, a lot of me skipping classes, which I did at a very young age in elementary school, skipping school. And so there was always that running away aspect that alcohol also helped play into.
How did your parents respond to that? What did they do about it?
Yeah, so I was one of those kids that always fell through the cracks, right? And it didn't seem to get noticed. And both my parents worked, and they had a lot of their own challenges, going on that put a lot of their attention on, themselves. I know my wife always says, "Where were your parents? Where were your parents? I can't believe this. Where were your parents?"
They just weren't there, huh?
Well, they were physically, my mom was physically around, but again, there's a lot of denial going on and focus on other things. So, big Pollyanna story, everything has to be perfect and right in the presentation to the world.
Things were just not very good at all, huh?
Yes, definitely.
That's tough. That's tough. So you kept on drinking through middle school and high school. What came next?
I did go to college. I didn't want to, but it was not really a choice I had.
Why didn't you want to go?
I wanted to just like work as a carpenter, or, in a trade like that, and be around people that wanted to party and smoke dope and drink and work with my hands. I was never all that great of a student, but in our house we went to school, so I applied to the same place I was born and where my parents went and was accepted. Getting there, in the first 3 weeks, I was arrested for joyriding. I got drunk with somebody else, really drunk, and we walked into town, and it's a small town, isolated where the university was. We tried to break into a couple of cars, and there was a pizza delivery guy who left his keys in the cars in front, and we jumped in and took off and went for a joyride, and then the police finally caught us. And so I was arrested and in jail for a couple of days. And
wow, a joyride with food. That's kind of nice, huh? Wow. Were they chasing you for a while? Were you just not pulling over?
Yep, for a little bit. The guy driving was running from him. So, I don't know how really I managed to stay in school and graduate, because I'd go from like 1.1 GPA grade average in a semester where I wasn't even going to class and just partying. And then the next semester I'd go to class and do what minimum I had to do and, get like a 3.4 grade point average. And it just kind of went back and forth like that through my years. And I did graduate in 4 years, but it was always studying something I didn't want to do, and most of my time there was really spent I worked in a bar, and of course this is back when the drinking age was 18, right? So
you mentioned the consequence of joyriding while you were drunk, and you said you went to jail for a few days. Did you get bailed out? Did your folks take care of the situation? What happened?
The guy that I was with, his dad took care of all the stuff, and then my dad reimbursed the bail money. They didn't actually come out. The only comment my dad had was that, I guess I should have expected this from you. And I guess he probably should have.
Did you get into trouble with that?
Yeah, I had to do community service hours and was on probation with whatever the legal consequences were, and then also with the school. But wasn't kicked out. Again, it's kind of like the consequences were pretty minimal. Was just able to carry on, and then eventually it was expunged from my record before I even graduated.
Isn't it interesting how that happens, and instead of it being a deterrent from future behavior like that, it's actually a validation that you can engage in that kind of behavior and get away with it?
Yeah, it's like this, and that's kind of the way it was for a long time. And the consequences, when I got out of college, again, I was in business, which I really just didn't care about, and it wasn't enjoyable, and I didn't like it. And then I got out of college and went in took a job as a salesperson, which still terrified of people, and being in outside sales. And so I failed at that for a really long time. But I also found that I couldn't drink the same way that I had been drinking and be presentable to at least show up and fake that I was going to do the job during the day. Mm-hmm. So my drug use picked up a lot. I drank a little less and did more drugs to still try and chase that, escapism and change the way I feel and such. But it was that starting in the workplace, that really started the cycle of ending my drinking, where the consequences of failed jobs, previous failed marriage, more and more isolation, ability to have money to drink and drug the way I wanted to. So eventually I got sober. It was kind of almost at the end of it where I was just in the house by myself, and my second wife, my current wife, she was paying all the bills and handling all the chores and, raising the two kids we had. And, I was lying around on the floor and just asking when the kids to bring me a beer from the fridge. And so she had people over to the house. I would go back in the bedroom and hide. Eventually, I got into AA because I had been dragging my wife to a marriage counselor, trying to get somebody to fix her. She was understandably angry, and I didn't understand why she was angry. Why are you mad all the time? There's something wrong with you.
Yeah, we're always the last ones to know, isn't that something?
Yeah. So that was 33 years old. That's when a marriage counselor said, you need to go to some AA meetings before I see you guys again.
Now, that first marriage that you had, how long did that last?
About a year or less.
Okay. Was it problematic from the start, and were those problems related to alcohol and drug use, or were there other factors?
We're going to all the bad stuff about the drinking.
Why not? We'll get to the good stuff later.
So I was going back to the university to see one of my friends on the weekends or skipping work. Would go and hang out and drink with them. He had dropped out of school and bought a bar and was running a bar, and was still in college town. So he had a group of college girls around. So it was there. I came back. We were partying one night, and I had a girl with me, and there was a girl that was there, and he bet her a case of beer that she couldn't get me to go home with her instead of the person I was with, and. But the next day we got together, and that was my first wife, and how we met. And she also had obviously drinking issues, but and then I would go back, and visit and stuff. But that was a relationship that I was seeking to have something that there's an apathy associated. Apathy is another kind of like danger signal for me. And that the drinking helped take care of. So I married, that first marriage I found and married somebody that I'm not sure why she married me, because she didn't like me, and that was part of the attraction. I married somebody that didn't like me and didn't really care about me. We do odd things, right? We do very odd things to ourselves.
So once again, the booze gets in there and makes an intolerable situation at least tolerable. I'm always curious whenever I talk to somebody who has a marriage during or somewhere within their alcoholism or drug addiction, what their thoughts were going into the marriage. What were the expectations and hope for that marriage that might have ultimately been addled by the fact that you were drinking and using drugs all the time?
For me, I probably was just looking to take somebody hostage to to have somebody to hold on to for all my, emotional needs. I was extremely insecure, no self-confidence. And so I was just looking for somebody to hold and take care of me, right? When we did get married and we moved to Dallas, Texas, she worked at a comedy club at night. So, the parties kind of continued on. So I'd go to a white-collar job in the day, and then she would show up at about 2 a.m. with other waitresses and people from the comedy club and be partying, and I would get up and then party with them. And then, till about 7 o'clock, 7:30, get a shower, and then, show up, check in, for my outside sales job, and then turn around and leave and go back. So
that's hard to sustain for a very long time, isn't it?
Yeah, on all kinds of levels. So, and I don't say this in any type of derogatory way, even though it is, but, I know I've said to you before, I think I married somebody that was having sex with the whole city of Dallas except for me. So that says, I'm meaning that to say something more about the unhealthiness of, my picking a partner, what those things look like. And so that didn't last, but, a year or so. There was actually a friend that we partied with that OD'd and died.
Oh.
A young girl during that time period also. And so that was the first time I saw a consequence like that took place. But it didn't stop me, It just was something, oh, she OD'd, didn't connect it to anything I was doing.
And by this time, you'd been using and drinking for so long, it probably was just another event along the way, I guess, huh?
Right. It definitely didn't carry the weight it should have.
So once you were divorced, what's the time frame between that ending of that marriage and your second marriage, and what was life like on an ongoing basis during that time?
So timeline-wise, it wasn't all that long. I lost my job probably within 9 months of the divorce, and I took a job working in a bookstore as a clerk, earning minimum wage. And I did that for a while, and that's where I met my current wife. She trained me. She's still trying to.
How's that working?
Yeah. Right. And I couldn't I couldn't afford to pay for an apartment living on that. So she offered to let me move in. We were started dating, again, it was a lot around drinking, drinking and sex. She let me move in with her. She was doing this, big fave for me. And of course, I, not being able to keep an apartment. And like I said, I'm starting to have consequences, right? I'm going downward in my job cycle already, instead of rising.
And you're in your early 20s at this point?
Yeah. So even with this and all that, probably mid-20s, I think at this point. Yeah, mid-20s. I put the condition on, okay, if I may move in with you, okay, but I better not ever come home and not find beer in the refrigerator, even though I couldn't afford to buy it. So.
And she was okay with that?
She's not a big drinker.
Right.
But, Al-Anons and alcoholics, or at least Al-Anons that need it, we find each other, right? It's a family disease. So I don't know. I can't speak to all the reasons why she would, want to be in a relationship with somebody like me. But obviously there were some.
Yeah.
And probably to the surprise of even us and everybody else, we've been married now I've been sober for 30 years and we've been married for 35. So a lot of rough times, as you know, a lot of really rough times in our marriage.
So you were married for 5 years before you actually got sober. What were those 5 years like?
Yeah, so a daughter from her previous marriage that when we got together was probably between 18 months and 2 years old, probably 2. I didn't want to get married. I wanted to continue chasing partying, drinking, and sex. And she wanted to get married and have kids. I definitely didn't want to have kids. We eventually did get married, and we did have kids, although, at the time I didn't really want them. So as I continued to deteriorate and, for some time we were feeding our kids soup over rice 3 times a week because, I wasn't working and they were having to have free medical care. And so it was always a big strain on the relationship. I was just always still chasing drinking, drugging, and sex and no responsibility. And she was trying to build a family, right?
Had she just given up on your behavior, David, at that point? Or was she still trying to do something that might change you to the better?
Yeah, I think she was trying to change, you know. She obviously carried a lot of resentment, rightfully so, towards me. But again, I would say that each of us carried in our own illness in some fashion. That we were both feeding the illness, and with that role, who I was played some kind of role that she needed also at the time. So it continued. It got violent in the house, and there's a lot of anger that the kids saw, violence that the kids saw growing in that 5 years.
Was this reciprocal anger back and forth, or were one of you more angry than the other?
She was the one that was angry. Yeah, and it was violent, really.
How did you deal with that?
I didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't know how to deal with it. I would push her off me, or um, yell back, or it came out of the blue all the time.
Yeah.
As far as I was concerned, because I was oblivious to everything, right? So, um, that was why I was really dragging us to marriage counseling. Of course, being completely blinded to my contributions to what all this was. And it wasn't until I knew I was an alcoholic by then. I knew I was an alcoholic by the time I married, but I did not connect any of the consequences of my life with the alcoholism. I just thought I'm a loser because I can't keep a job, or my health is always bad because it just is that way. I don't have any friends, not because of my drinking and isolation. It's because I can't get along with people, and I don't like people.
Yeah. So like most of us, you had some difficulties connecting the dots between your alcoholism and the consequences and the state of your marriage and your relationship with your wife and
Right.
the lack of relationship with other people, etc.
Yep.
And we're usually the last ones to know. Everybody around us knows that we're alcoholic and have some real problems. And when did you finally get to the point at which you were willing to connect those dots and see for yourself?
When the marriage counselor said you have to go in for, at least 3 meetings before I see you guys again. Now, my plan really was I wanted to leave the marriage, but I was afraid that the kids, that there were 2 children at the time, would not be safe with her at home. So I wanted to kind of get her fixed enough so that I could then leave the marriage and just be homeless, basically. That was my plan. I had this great idea of being, the fool on the hill, where, I laughed at humanity. Ha ha ha, look how stupid you guys all are for chasing the dollar and da da da. I just, and what happened was, in going to those meetings, I didn't really go to quit drinking. What happened was, it was the only place people welcomed me. I hadn't, by that time, my isolation was so big. I was isolated from myself. I was isolated from everybody else. I was isolated from God. And so there was just this big, empty void inside. And when I walked in those rooms, people gave me hugs. They said, welcome. And I went back to those meetings just to get the hugs for probably 6 months at least. And I remember thinking that there was a woman that we both knew that was at the meeting, and she got her a 6-year chip, and I was probably someplace between, I don't know, less than 6 months sober. I remember asking her after meeting, does that mean you never had any alcohol during the whole time, or you just didn't get drunk during that 6 years? And she was like, yes, yes, David, that means I didn't have any alcohol. So I think that was the first time I really started, realizing that it was. The first 30 days were pretty miserable, not having any alcohol. But, I wanted, in that extent of the relationships and fellowship, I wanted that. And again, I didn't connect it to the not drinking. And there have been plenty of times in early sobriety, maybe even through the first 5 years, that the idea would be, I could probably drink and just work this program. If I can just, work these spiritual principles, and I could probably drink. Yeah. And, can I still have you guys as friends? And I think the idea that I couldn't have you guys as a fellowship kept me from following through on that idea, and going to drink, because I would have, Howard, I'm going to drink now, Well, are we going to be able to spend time together and have this deep friendship that you and I have developed over the years, and some place to go, right? Because it still took me quite some time to grow up and being sober and start to be employable and to start to participate in life. And during that time, especially the first 2-3 years, AA was the only place I had to go.
Yeah, the incompatibility between wanting to drink and still wanting to be part of the good things that AA has to offer, the fellowship, the spiritual grounding, all the other good things. It's unusual, I shouldn't say unusual, but it's not all that common that someone goes to AA and they get sober because of what they want from the program at that point. A lot of times people will stop drinking and go to AA because they don't want the consequences that come with being an alcoholic. They want to get through the problems that they're having, and that's why they go to AA. You went to AA, it sounds like, because something there was being offered to you that you couldn't get from alcohol and from relationships and everything else. And that was enough to get you to stop drinking. To me, that speaks of a very powerful psychic change to take somebody who's been an alcoholic for so many years and they stop drinking because of the gifts that the program is able to give them from day one. Is that a pretty fair assessment?
I would say you just gave my arms a chill because I've never really thought about it that way. But yeah, I think that is true. There must have been something that recognized that there were gifts there, or at least I didn't identify it that way at the time, mm-hmm. right? It wasn't later, but yeah, I can look back now, and I think that's right, Howard. That the gifts were already there, mm-hmm. and without knowing it, I wanted them.
We'll be right back. My friends, if you're enjoying listening to my AA Recovery Interviews podcast, check out my latest audiobook, Lost Stories of the Big Book, 30 original stories missing from the 3rd and 4th editions of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's an engaging audiobook that brings these stories to life for AA members who've never seen them. These timeless testimonials were originally cut to make room for newer stories in the 3rd and 4th editions. But their vitally important messages of hope are as meaningful today as they were when they were first published. Many listeners will hear these stories for the very first time. Have a free listen to Lost Stories of the Big Book on Audible, Amazon, or iTunes. It's also available as a Kindle book and in paperback from Amazon. While you're there, treat yourself to another audiobook I produced, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how more than 100 men have recovered from alcoholism. This is the word-for-word, cover-to-cover reading of the first printing of the first edition of the Big Book, published in 1939. It's a comfortable, meaningful, and engaging way to listen to the Big Book, anytime, any place. Have a free listen at Audible, Amazon, or iTunes. You're going to love it. And we're back. Was your wife at the time, was she supportive of you going to AA and of trying to change your life via the program?
I'm going to say it depends whether you ask me or my wife.
I'm asking you. I'm not interviewing her. I'm asking you.
Yeah.
I think I already know the answer.
My
but
answer.
Go ahead.
My answer is no. There's that whole dynamic that changes when somebody starts to get healthy and they change their behavior. And so I look back and say there were times where she would leave beer out, that she would then, even though she's not an alcoholic, that she would drink at me and leave it out. It was a huge power shift of what was taking place in the relationship. And she didn't know anymore who she was married to, right? And I wasn't filling whatever role I was supposed to be filling anymore for her. So I'm not saying that there was any ill will intended on her behalf, but it's a big dynamic change that everybody goes through in a relationship that, is an alcoholic, and change is not easy, right? It's not just about us. It affects everybody. Everybody's got to relate to this new person that we are, right?
Yeah. What I'm wondering is that a lot of times when people go into the program and they start to change, they get an expectation because of that change and because of the way people are treating them in meetings and all of the gifts that they're starting to receive by virtue of their participation in AA. They get an expectation, I know I did, that somehow my life with my wife would be so much different and so much better immediately. And that even though she supported me in going, I think for a long time she really didn't expect that I would continue to go for whatever reason, that this would just be another failed attempt at something that I thought would work and didn't. What were your expectations about the relationship with your wife because you were going to AA?
getting into AA, I was completely, I was, as we say in the meetings, I was a dead person in a live body walking the face of the earth, waiting for my body to catch up. And so I didn't know anything about feelings anymore. I didn't know anything about values. And as I started to become sober, slowly, I think this happens for all of us, but for me, I start to become the person that God wanted me to be all along. I mean, I had to really do some basic work, like, those emotional smiley faces. I mean, I remember having to look at the chart on that to say, this is a happy face, this is an angry face, this is a sad face. I was so disconnected. And then I started to identify, this is happiness, this is kindness, this is trustworthiness. And as those things started to develop in me, and as I started to understand what was important to me, I started wanting those things in my marriage. And so it did create an expectation, and I would say it's an unfair expectation to my partner or my wife, to say, not that it was unfair for me to have, but that, then I was expecting her to change, right? And demanding her to change for my happiness. So that in itself is its own, long journey, the relationship.
Yeah, and I remember early in your program seeing you in meetings and really feeling good about the good things that were going on, but also feeling like I wish there's something I could tell him that would ratchet down his expectations about what to expect now that he's sober. But somewhere along the way, you got that. In your early days of sobriety, obviously you enjoyed going to the meetings because you were getting the hugs and the positive regard and everything else when you went. When was it that you actually started to work the steps and get into the working part of the program off of just the initial liking to be there because it was warm and fuzzy?
I don't recall the exact time frame, but it was pretty early, I think. I mean, I would say after 30 days, getting through that first 30 days, I don't remember if it was 2 months or 3 months that I finally approached you. I was terrified of people, but again, it was the same reason of doing the steps as it was for staying in the meetings. I still felt separated, right? I recognized that the people that were there that had worked the steps had a different kind of bond than I had with them. And so, yes, I wanted all my life to change and be better, but I also wanted to be accepted more. I wanted to be a part of it more. And so my motivation, again, it wasn't really about not drinking. Although I accepted 100% what you told me and others told me, that if I didn't do the steps, I would drink again. I just knew I wanted more of what you guys had.
Yeah.
And I wanted to feel like I was part of more. So, again, I was chasing kind of that emotional, I would say spiritual part in that today, the spiritual connection part, without really knowing it then.
And as I recall, there were some really strong AA personalities in the meetings that you and I would see each other in all the time, and people who were very book-worthy and very much oriented towards the work that was necessary to stay sober. And I think it was great for you to be around those kind of people early on. That, if you talk about a great group of people to get sober with, I think that group that we went to at noon every day was definitely of that ilk. So were there any times within your first, let's say, 6 months or 12 months or even a couple of years that you were questioning your involvement or thinking, is this all there is, or perhaps I can go back to drinking? What were those first couple of years like for you with regard to that?
Yeah, the first year especially, I remember thinking, and I was full of self-pity still really, really full of self-pity in that first year. And, that's still something I have to keep. In fact, I was feeling a little self-pity this morning, and I physically wrote down a gratitude list, right? So that can still come up and bite me some. But
a guy who's got 30 years writing out a gratitude list, what's up with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it works. That's what's up with that. I don't like to feel bad today.
I get that.
I don't like feeling bad.
Yeah.
So Yes. So, in fact, it was around that year. I had talked to you that morning, and this is one of what I call like one of my 5 peak spiritual experiences that I had. I talked to you that morning, and you always were so generous with your time. We would typically meet at the meeting, and then you would give me a whole bunch of time after to talk, where we would work the program. And you said, "Oh, you can't make it to the meeting that day." I went to the meeting. Was still feeling really disconnected and full of self-pity. And I said to myself, everybody left the meeting, and I was in the parking lot by myself, and I said, if this is how I have to feel, and I was still struggling with work a whole lot, the beating myself up with self-esteem because I was still an outside sales job, and I still was sitting in my car all day, not making calls, and then going back and lying to the boss about, that I made calls. So I was beating myself up, and I said in the parking lot, I said, if this is how I have to feel, if this is what I have to feel for sobriety, I'm going to go drink. And I was on my way to get in the car to call this guy I knew up that my plan was to go with this guy because he liked to go to biker bars and to go get into like a 2-week drunk and get in fights and, just really do it. And you showed up in the parking lot before I got to my car. And you said, I was wondering if you were still going to be here. And that is a God thing to me today. You weren't supposed to be there. The meeting was over. I was the only one left in the parking lot. And you showed up not knowing if anyone would be around, if I would be there. And there you were. And I don't remember if we went to lunch or we stood around and talking in the parking lot, but I didn't go drink. Wow. And that was a really, real pivotal, that was one of many pivotal moments that I look at, today as a big spiritual experience that God works in my life and does for me what I can't do for myself, and that God keeps me sober. He does it through other people. Sometimes, a lot of times through other people, sometimes, independently. But that was probably one of the big, there were others, I can't remember them, going through now that I would have, but that was a real big eye-opener to me that God keeps me sober. I don't keep me sober as long as I'm willing to do the things that are suggested.
Yeah, that's a powerful story, and it's one that you and I have talked about in the past, and I think it's really a strong proof to anybody looking for it that if we just will be open to allowing people in, then somehow God finds a way to fit them in. And I can't remember why I went back. I think I knew I couldn't go to the meeting that day, but I don't know why I must have gotten done with whatever it was that I was doing. And at the time, I too was in outside sales and dreading having to go back in and make phone calls. That's probably the reason I showed back up in the parking lot. I was looking for an excuse to not go back to work right away. But so that's a pretty powerful thing to have happen at such an important time in your sobriety. So fast forward us a little bit here, Dave, from the that time through some of the other key moments of your sobriety in the early years. Let's say within the first 5 to 10 years, and then we'll take a look at the longer term.
The first 5 or 6 years were really amazing. The amount of growth. I know we have the saying that when we get sober, we still have to go back to when we were drunk, because that's when all our personal growth stopped. And for me, that was pretty young. So, and I was running away from things. So I had a lot of growing up to do. And there was a lot of real personal growth taking place in my life for that first 5, 6 years. And even though I still had lots of struggles, relationship struggles, work struggles, regular life struggles, right? That seemed too big to overcome. In general, I look at that period as being extremely happy time in my program. I was still dealing with a lot of loneliness and fear in the job, but the growth that took place was so amazing. The awareness that took place was so amazing the development of the fellowship and the friends, the development of a relationship with God, higher power, the changes that were taking place in my life and starting to participate in my life and to be a father, and to walk through fear and things, to take on responsibilities, to shed some of the self-centeredness and selfishness and get a bit, an understanding of my motives, and the freedom from bondage by doing the amends. Man, as you know, for me, I didn't feel good after doing step 4 and step 5, but when I got a further understanding of my part when I did the amends, and that's where the real freedom and the promises really became apparent to me. Some were just taken away completely. Others I just still work on today, right? I look at that time period as building a strong program and having so many blessings and growth take place. It was a really happy time of my sobriety, that first 6 years. All my relationships changed. All of my relationships changed. Not all of them, great, but they all changed in a really good way.
When people take a look at somebody whose life has changed to that degree within the first 5 or 6 years of working an AA program, the expectation is it must have been easy, or you must have just gotten it at every step. What struggles did you face within those 6 years when it comes to working a program that ultimately got you to feeling that it was a wonderful place to be at the end of that period of time?
Some of them we've already touched on. I still struggled with loneliness, which is really loneliness and apathy are kind of core issues for me.
Let's say with specific regard to the working of the steps, what did you face as you were working the steps that might be considered struggles that you had to overcome before you could actually do them?
Preventing me from doing the steps?
Yeah, preventing you or creating maybe a half-hearted effort or roadblocks along the way to working the steps.
I don't. Your perception on this may be different than mine. I never felt like. I always felt like I did the best I could. I mean, it might not. If you looked at it on a piece of paper, maybe it was someone would rate it as a mediocre attempt or something. But to me, I always felt like I was doing everything that I could. And so I didn't have a lot of, I know I had fear and trepidation about doing step 4 and step 5 and doing the amends, but it was never so much that, you didn't talk me through it and that I didn't do them. Right. So I didn't have a lot of, I know some people really struggle with working through the steps. I didn't ever feel that way, really.
I think that that's a fair way to state it. And from my perspective, and this is an unusual interview in the sense that I was kind of there to see a lot of this back at the time when you were initially doing it. But I also like these interviews to kind of shed some light that people shed some light on the way people actually work their programs, to dispel any notion that this is either really hard or really easy. It just is what it is. And watching you during that period of time do what you had to do to get through it, to me, that says a lot to the quality of your overall program and the longevity of it.
Well, there are people like you and others in the program that said to me, we learn first, you guys love us, and then we learn how to love ourselves. And so there was always messages going to me that said, be kind to yourself, love yourself, do what you need to do to take care of yourself. And the concept I really have grab onto today is that it's okay to muddle through everything. I love this concept of muddling through the things because it lets go of the expectation that anything has to be perfect. It's okay to, go back and forth across the spiritual beam some and make mistakes. And, we have the tools to correct ourselves. And, I also remember early on, especially when I was started sponsoring people, is that we're as honest as we can be at any given time. right? We're only as honest as we can be at that point. And so we don't need to have a lot of judgmentalism about it. Our willingness is something that's developed. And we're not all in the same place at the same time. And my willingness varies, in day to day still. So as you guys have instructed me, I'm kind to myself. If it's not there that day, and then I do the best that I can, and know that I need to go back and do more, and I self-adjust today. And so for me, that is kind of like this concept of muddling through. It's not perfect. It's okay. It's just as okay where it is. And that would be a message I would give to new people in sobriety. Don't set yourself up for failure by expecting that you have to do this perfectly, because you don't.
I agree with that 100%. And that's why I think the word trudge was put in there and was left in there. I heard the definition of trudge once as methodical forward progress. It didn't say, and the book doesn't say, skipping merrily down the road of happy destiny, or...
But that's what I wanted.
It's floating with no concern down that road.
Right.
On the other hand, it doesn't say scratching and clawing our way down that road. It just says trudging, and that's just moving ahead, irrespective of what is on the path, but just staying on the path nonetheless. And I've seen you do that. So there's a lot of time between that first 5 years and even today. That's 25 years of involvement in AA. As you look back over the 25 years, can you point to a few things that have occurred within your life that you can look back on and see a real spiritual connection? Yeah, I guess what I'm asking is, in 25 years of sobriety, a lot can happen. And I think a lot of people wonder, they make assumptions about long-term sobriety as if this guy's been sober for a long time, it must have been really easy for him because I know the difficulties I'm having early on.
Yeah.
Or I see this guy, he's stayed sober all this time, but I don't necessarily see the growth, and he still acts like an asshole nonetheless. I'm wondering what kind of things were going on for you within your program that might be viewed as real milestones that showed that you were on the right track, albeit not necessarily always feeling happy or peppy or bursting with love.
I look back over the 30 years and, there were kind of, as you said, milestone markers. Years 6 to 11 or 12, I really felt like I had this thing in the bag, right? And that I was practicing the principles in all my affairs. And so I let meetings go. And I wasn't doing very many meetings. I let some of my prayer and meditation go. I let working with others go. I let my reading go. The one thing I did do was always stay in touch with you. But when I look back at that period, when I was at 11 or 12 years of sobriety, I felt like I was going completely insane. I mean, I was really felt like I had a huge amount of growth going, like in work. And that's part of what was taking place, is that I was like making up for all the times that I didn't do what I was supposed to do, and caring for my family financially in other ways, and being present, and being a dad, and trying to be a good husband, and I thought that as long as I use these principles, I don't need to worry about those 5 things that we talk about doing all the time, that they would take care of myself. But like 12 years, I thought I was literally going to have like a psychotic break. And part of it is because the selfishness and self-centeredness came back with a big bang. And instead of being on the end of the spectrum of depression and self-pity and, of that, I was trying to control everything in life. And so I was trying to direct everything and work. And I was creating a lot of chaos with thinking. If you'd asked me, I said, I'm working all the principles. But man, I was being a bull in the china shop everywhere I went, and creating a lot of chaos. And again, just like when I came in the program, I had blinders on to all this stuff, right? So if you asked me, I said I was, working a great program and, didn't need these things. And of course, some of the things that took place during that time period too, where I was making bad choices, things like that. So I would say that kind of prompted it. And then, through some of those few years, there was a lot of dealing with that. My marriage was still a big struggle, for quite some time. There have been 3 times in my marriage I moved out of the house, right? And so that had its own impact, not only on a relationship, but with my kids and such, and the trauma that they see, and that I see reflected today in their lives and relationships. Some good, some not good. Yeah, so I think, like you were saying, the trudging, my expectation was always that AA was going to fill every single need I had. I was going to kind of like go skipping down the street, singing in the rain and tap dancing with a big smile on my face. And, I wouldn't have to deal with life really. It was all just going to be some big Zen Buddhism tra-la-la. And that, of course, isn't what happens.
It rarely does, but we expect it to nonetheless. This is tough, I think, for almost anybody in a program, whether there's a sponsor relationship or just a close friendship. You and I were involved in some other things where we were gaining some personal growth at the time.
Right.
And I'd see you at that particular function, but you weren't going to very many meetings. But things seem to be going really well for you despite that fact. And one of the difficulties for me in sponsoring guys or having close friends who start moving out from the center of the program towards the edge, while all the time saying, oh, but things are going so well, it almost seems counterintuitive to say to the guy, well, your life is going so well now because of the work that you've done thus far, so do more work, be more of an example of how that work affects people positively, show off in meetings the promises and the gifts of sobriety. But what ends up happening is, and I remember feeling this way, I would say, what meetings have you gone to? And there were always some reasons, very valid reasons, that the alcoholic in me just wanted to agree with and say, oh, yeah, okay, well, I get it. You weren't able to make it because of this or that. And yet you and I both know that in sponsoring other people, sometimes we have to get right in there and say, look, you have kind of taken your eye off the ball. You knew that this is why you got to this point today. And here you're taking the things that got you here and saying that those things are no longer valid because you've arrived someplace.
Right. Yeah, that message has always stayed with me. One of the things you always did for me, and you still do, not to the kind of the same extent, but one of the questions you always ask me when we talk, how many meetings are you going to? You still do that today, right? In the 30 plus years we've known each other, when we talk, how are your meetings? How are they are? And that's something I do with sponsees today. How many meetings did you go to this week? And we can't tell anybody what is the right number of meetings for them. But I use that same phrase you would talk to me during all those years. So if you didn't know that, you get to hear back now. You used to always say you're back up to the edge of the cliff and you don't know when that next step you're gonna step off. And I say that. My sponsor used to always say this to me, and this is what happens when you get out on the periphery and you don't know when the next step will be off the cliff because you're backing up to it, because you're backing away from the things that work.
And the ground still feels solid underfoot, even right up to the edge of the cliff.
But we have to let everybody go and find that themselves.
That's a hard thing to do, though, isn't it?
Yeah, sometimes it is. Especially if there's a family member dealing with this. That's really challenging. And it is frustrating. And I've let go a lot of that, too, of thinking you have to work the program a specific way. This is like you told me, it's a loose coat, and everybody has their own program and relationship, and we don't know what God's plan is. So we pass on the message, and then what they do with it is up to them.
Yeah, so we have to just continue to do the work, chop wood, carry water, as they say.
Yeah.
And since the times at which you, even in that first 10 years or so, the thing that I've noticed about you and the work that you've put into your sobriety is that you spent a lot more time in the last, let's say, 20 years of your sobriety sponsoring and being of service to other people. What kind of connection do you see between the willingness to work with others and just the ease of working the program after that?
I think that we start sponsoring people when we're ready to sponsor people. And I don't think I was ever really ready to sponsor people. Maybe I didn't have enough of the right gifts, early on. I know you always said, raise your hand in a meeting. I don't remember when I've had first sponsees, but that you were really focused on trying to get me to sponsor more people earlier on than when it actually kind of naturally took place. The way it happened for me is I just think it happened when it happened. I was always willing, and I think that's the key. So going up and talking to people after and sharing your experience with them and letting them see. Being present at meetings is really key. You and I both know lots of people that are sober for a long time that don't do meetings. First of all, I do have a sense of responsibility and duty to give this back because of so many blessings that have been bestowed on my family, on myself. It's just like I couldn't in good conscience not with everything. It's like I owe a debt. I owe a debt. But there's a great sense of growth and joy that takes place too. And I do think it keeps us sober, even at 30 years. Nothing worse than somebody with 30 years going out. I don't think this ever really changes. I could still have a drink today. And so I need the protection of that.
Yeah.
And there's such a joy. These relationships we started, I have, the person that I have, somebody that's like 22 years sober.
Mm-hmm.
And the relationships, like I have with you and that particular person and some of the other people that we sponsor, these are deep, spiritual, trustworthy, honest relationships. I mean, when I walk down the street and I know I carry those relationships with me, I just feel grounded. I feel safe. I feel ability to deal with life on life's terms. And they're an immense part of the promises of this program. I don't have relationships like that anyplace else. I don't have them with family. I love my kids so much, but I don't have that same kind of relationship as I do with the people that are in the program. It's a different, loving, relationship that is extremely important to me. I'd give my life for my kids, but it's not the same. There's something it's very spiritually deep about our fellowship of the relationship through being sponsored and sponsoring someone else. And of course, it requires sacrifice.
Yeah, it's the sacrifice and it's the willingness to put yourself out there and make yourself available. I always say that I think availability is 9/10 of the game when it comes to sponsorship, when it comes to doing service work of any kind. And I've known you to be a real service-oriented guy over the years. 30 years is a lot of time to sum up the impact on one man's life, but from my perspective, I've seen it big time in your life because I've been witness to so many different things that you've gone through and gotten through. I've also had the opportunity to watch you share the gifts with others, and that's a beautiful thing to see.
None of that happens without being sober first, right? But being sober isn't enough. It's the gifts that we get. It prepares us for the spiritual experience with others, with God and with others. And none of that happens without being sober, but the gifts are that spiritual experience with God and our fellow travelers on this trudging road we do.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And what I find is there are certain indelible things within the program that haven't changed since the beginning that are still remain as truths to be put forth to anybody who's struggling anywhere. And what those are is go to meetings, read the book, pray, work the steps, work with others. You can never go wrong saying those things. I find in my experience, if a man calls me who I sponsor or is just I know him from meetings, and he wants to talk about a lot of different things, I always think, I might not know what to tell him about a job situation. I might not know what to tell him about a personal situation or a relationship with a wife or children or that. I may not know what the right thing is to say, but I know I can't go wrong if I take it back to the basics of the program.
Right.
And I found that situation just the other day. A guy called me up and he's facing some challenges with his job, and he's got some real big fears around that and everything else. And like you said earlier, I just said, so what meetings are you getting to? And the reason for that was because he was losing perspective. He was starting to feel alone and unique again. And I think one of the great things about going to meetings at a time like that, when you're feeling alone and unique, is that you're in a room full of people who, when they share, you're going to realize you're not unique and you're not alone. And there are a lot of people who are going through similar and worse stuff than you are.
Yeah.
But if you're not in the meeting, you don't get it.
Yeah.
You don't get it. I've seen you get it over the years, and this has been a beautiful time for us to spend together. We spent almost 90 minutes here talking, and even though I've known an awful lot of you for a lot of years, there's a lot that I learned today, especially as we started to put the pieces together. I see before me a man who has been visibly changed by sobriety over the years that I've known him, but still to this day, whenever you and I talk, I still hear that gratitude in your voice. Was there ever a time at which you stopped feeling grateful, where you felt like you were fed up with the program?
Yes.
Enough is enough.
Yeah, there were a lot of times in it. I think one of the key issues for me, and this goes before the program, this is rooted, seated stuff for me, this loneliness thing. So there was a whole long period of time I was going to meeting, trying to find a relationship to fill that loneliness. And it never did. And so I was like, why am I going to meetings? It's not solving this issue for me. That's just one example. These things are normal, whatever the issue is. And AA is not going to solve everything. I had to learn to be patient. That's very difficult. That is probably the most difficult skill that I've had to learn, is to be patient and let things unfold in the time frame that they're supposed to unfold, because I don't want to do the work all the time. One of the perplexing things about AA is it's not like in a job where I start point A and I do B, and that makes me go to point C. My program hasn't worked like that. I can't say that, I went to a meeting and didn't take a drink today, so X happened. Somebody came in my life, even outside of AA, that I was supposed to come into my life, and it's crazy. It doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah, well,
but it happens.
Right, it doesn't.
It happens.
Yeah. And it happens, I think, from time to time, at least I think for everybody I've known who's got long-term sobriety, and even those who don't, is that there comes a time at which we start to question whether or not all the things we're doing are necessary. And boy, if I just would cut down one meeting a week, I'd have more time to do this or to do that. But I have to realize that that's a disease that's still hardwired into my soul, that's telling me that I don't need what I need to stay reasonably happy in this life. And so, whenever I hear you say about having to face the things that you're facing, and some days we just got to get through it, and tomorrow may be different, it may not, but at the end of the day, I have to remember who I am and why I'm here. And a good friend of mine says, we ask God, lead me where you need me, and I think that's a real true thing to say.
I love this concept. Again, it kind of goes through with muddling. I heard someone say in a meeting this last year, they said instead of using the word balance of finding everything, they like to use the word blending. And it takes away the idea of perfectionism of hitting X number of meetings or hitting the gym X number of days. But they like to think of it as being more fluid and blending all these aspects, because we do get a big life when we're sober. And so, how am I blending everything today? And it allows me to kind of flow more, I like to call muddling through everything, and we're aware today. We are aware today. So I know if I'm feeling squirrely, I need to write a gratitude list down, or pay extra attention to the meeting, get to a meeting or something.
That's beautiful to hear, and I'm so glad that you and I have had the chance to share today. And I see a man who's working a program that continues to work. I want to tell you that I love you and that I honor the quality of your sobriety. And as much as you may think you've learned from me over the years, I've learned a hell of a lot from you. And watching you go through what you've gone through and letting you be part of my life as I'm going through what I go through, it's just, I love the idea of blending, because balance presumes two different things trying to meet in the middle. Blending says, let's not worry about those two things. Let's just worry about the outcome in the middle. So I just love that. And I want to thank you for doing this interview today and for being such a big part of my life. This is one of my little dreams fulfilled, to be able to have you on the show.
Happen when it's supposed to happen. And you are the most important man in my life, Howard. So, I have a deep, deep love and affection for you, and I value our relationship. I value it tremendously, and very grateful that you've been my sponsor all these years.
Well, that's great. Let's go ahead and take that good vibe out and change the world, David.
All right.
Thanks so much for doing this today, brother.
Good to talk. Yeah, talk soon.
Okay, my friend.
Right.
God bless you.
God bless.
Bye-bye. Well, my friends, that's it for today's episode of AA Recovery Interviews. I want to thank my guest, David B., for sharing his story, and thank you for tuning in. If you've enjoyed the interviews in this podcast series, please share it with others. This show is another helping hand of AA we can all extend to alcoholics everywhere. If you want to contact me directly with any comments, questions, or suggestions, simply email howard@aarecoveryinterviews.com. Please also take a minute to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. And take note, AA Recovery Interviews can now be found on the YouTube Music app. By the way, this podcast strictly adheres to AA's 12 traditions and all General Service Office guidelines for safeguarding anonymity online. I pay all production costs, and no one receives financial gain from the podcast. AA Recovery Interviews and my guests do not speak for or represent AA at large. This podcast is simply my way of giving back to AA that which has been so freely given to me. The next episode of AA Recovery Interviews is on the way, so keep coming back. It'll be here soon.